Now let's talk to Nick Freeman, criminal defence lawyer, author and commentator, also known, of course, as Mr. Loophole, because even as we're about to talk about this petition that we've got going in front of Parliament, which we want them to discuss, there's stories of e-scooters being used by drunken people, crashes fuelled by booze. We've got all sorts of studies now being done into how dangerous these things are. We've got people in Liverpool asking for the studies to be halted and the trials to be halted. Nick, a very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike.
This seems to be a very timely petition because just as these trials have begun, it seems as though the focus of an awful lot of people's minds is on these e-scooters.
Well, Mike, yes, good fortune. We managed to launch it yesterday, the 7th of June.
Yes.
As you'll know, is the day that the trial periods in, I think, 6 or 7 boroughs of London started for e-scooters. So timely indeed. It tends to focus the mind, doesn't it? And there's one very common point that relates to e-scooters and cyclists, and that's who's driving at any one time. And until we deal with that, the laws that currently exist are largely redundant. So you and I have got together to try and make the laws more relevant and really to try and create harmony on the roads. This isn't a war or a battle against anyone. This is to try and help us coexist happily together so that motorists, cyclists, scooter riders, we all feel that the roads are there to assist us and to help us and to try and take the stress out of the roads. So, as you know, we've launched this petition to petition the government to actually draft some legislation that's relevant and appropriate. And the starting point is, of course, making sure that we know at any one time who is on an e-scooter and who is on a cyclist. Because unfortunately, I mean, there are different problems that exist with both. But until we actually grasp that nettle and be sure that we know who is cycling or e-scootering, then the laws don't really touch the problem. And I think once you actually make somebody accountable, they become responsible. I mean, can you imagine taking the registration plate off motorists and saying, look, you drive around in your car with no means really of knowing who you are? I think people's driving will be very different, and they would be tempted to drive irresponsibly. And that's the situation that currently exists. So with cyclists and e-scooters, the starting point is let's know who it is. Let's have a system that in the same way relates to motorists, that a member of the public, if for example, you see a cyclist cycling on the pavement going through red lights, they can be filmed, that can be downloaded, the police can prosecute because they will know how to trace that person. And to give it teeth insofar as cyclists, we need relevant legislation. The e-scooters, the legislation actually is exactly the same as motor vehicles. So there's no problem there. There are penalty points, there's drink driving limits, etc., etc. The problem is finding out who it is. With cyclists, there isn't a penalty point system. There's no disqualification. The legislation is woefully inadequate. There isn't actually a speeding limit for cyclists. There isn't actually a drink drive limit. There is an offence of driving whilst unfit. So what I'm suggesting with you is to petition the government so that they will draft proper legislation, a penalty point system, disqualification if you continue to commit offences, and obviously basically to have one rule for the road that applies to everybody.
Yes.
That's the simple way of putting it.
Well, exactly, and that's the fair way to approach all of these things, because once again, to me, it's a little bit like the asylum seeker laws. You know, they were designed a very long time ago to deal with something which is now very, very different. In the same way that the road laws were designed a very long time ago, sometimes before even cars were actually in use. And so we need to have a revamp, clearly, of all of the laws and the access that people have, because even as we speak, in Liverpool, for example, they've set up a trauma network group because of all the injuries that people have been suffering since they introduced the new trial scheme just a few days ago. This operation, I don't know whether you've seen this study from the Charité University Medicine in Berlin, has looked at 11,000 accidents that have taken place in their sort of, sphere of influence, because people have accidents in them because they go very fast, you can't see them, you don't know who's on them, pedestrians get hit all the time. It's a really dangerous situation.
They're incredibly dangerous. I think people are very cavalier about them because they think actually that the law doesn't apply. I can get on an e-scooter and I'm free. It's a wonderful feeling. I'm free. I mean, there's an inherent problem with the design of e-scooters, and that's the wheels are too small. And you don't need to take any proficiency tests. What you now need to do in London, and this doesn't apply for the rest of the country, is you have to do an online course. But what you actually need is to practice on one, to just understand how unstable they are, the difficulties with indication, for example.
Yeah.
There's only one manufacturer actually has indicators as part of the e-scooter. For all the others, you have to take a hand off the e-scooter and signal either left or right on something that's already precariously balanced.
Yes.
So that there are few, and of course then, you know, you're advised to wear a helmet, but it's not mandatory. So in this weather, people are definitely not going to wear helmets, and tragically, there's going to be terrible head injuries as a consequence of that. So this isn't a game. And when you think that they're being enrolled in 6 boroughs at the moment, another borough, I think, in a few weeks' time, City of London delayed it slightly.
Yeah.
There are going to be masses of these hitting the road, and we all need to know how to coexist, because, you know, drivers, they have to concentrate on cyclists. They're now going to have e-scooters coming up on the inside, the near side, the off side. They're going to be going to the front of the traffic. They're not going to be heard. They're going to be cutting across. So this is something that everyone needs to address. It's not particularly one group of people that this affects. Drivers, of course, need to learn how to deal with these and to exercise even more caution. And then, of course, with the e-scooters, and I don't want to just target those, there's the problem of crime. And I've heard anecdotally, and I had a friend who called me 2 days ago to say that she'd actually been robbed going into a hotel, a handbag snatched by an e-scooter, illegal e-scooter obviously, because it was before yesterday, just snatched, gone, that was it, the end of the handbag. This is going to become a perennial problem, and they're going to get away, aren't they, scot-free?
Yeah, well, do you know, I had my kids up in London last weekend, bank holiday weekend, and I said to them for the first time, I think, ever, don't get your phones out while we're walking around, because there's these kids on scooters all over the West End, all over places like Knightsbridge, Hyde Park, you know, and they will just snatch it and take off, and there's nothing you can do.
Well, I don't understand, Mike. You know, Greater London's a large area. The Met tell us that they seize 4 e-scooters a day.
Really?
Now, why don't they have an operation where they say it's going to be e-scooter seizure day? And there are thousands of unlawful e-scooters on the street. The only ones that are lawful are from these pilot schemes, of which there are very few. So why don't they put some bobbies on the beat and seize and destroy all these illegal e-scooters? You know, the maximum speed of these e-scooters is 68 miles an hour. You know, they're incredibly dangerous. They're unlawful. There's no insurance, and the riders aren't accountable. So one way of dealing with it, until the relevant law comes in, is for the police to actually be proactive. Education isn't going to be sufficient, and actually put the bobbies on the street, and every e-scooter that you see that's unlawful, you seize it. That's it, because they shouldn't be there. And of course, then there's penalty points that follow from that. You know, there'll be probably 6 penalty points from that, because there's no insurance. There'll be a heavy financial penalty, and there would be forfeiture of the e-scooter. Now, that's a heavy price to pay. And if the police were seen to do that, I think that will be a huge deterrent. They'd only need to do it for a short period of time for people to think, actually, I'm taking a huge and very expensive risk here.
Yes.
But at the moment, 4 e-scooters a day, it's a joke. It's an insult, I'm afraid, to the taxpayer. It's not even paying lip service to the problem.
No, exactly right. I mean, I see at least 20 on any journey that I take, you know, anywhere, walking around or even if I'm in a car. But since I launched this petition with you, Nick, it's been interesting. I've had lots of people sending me little videos of places like Birmingham where there's a problem where people are going up, the e-scooters are going up on the pavements. They're sort of cutting across traffic. They go across zebra crossing. You don't even know quite which way they're going. They're going against the traffic, going with the traffic, as you say, in all sorts of different ways. But I also had quite a few cyclists talking to me about how useless the cycle lanes are, because one of my bugbears is that an awful lot of cyclists don't use the cycle lanes for which the roads have now been designed. They say it's because they're full of debris and they don't want to get a puncture. Yeah,
they're debris and full of potholes, and they're dangerous for the cyclists. So the government obviously needs to invest in. We always keep talking about this because our roads, the motorist roads, are horrendous as well. But there needs to be, in my view, cycle lanes should be mandatory. It shouldn't be a choice for a cyclist. I'm going to use the road today because I don't fancy the cycle lane. They have to use them, and the motorists, the cyclists, need to lobby the government and say we need to make these cycle lanes. If they're going to be mandatory, they need to be safe. So we need to make them fit for purpose, and then the cyclists might be persuaded to use them. So, you know, that's one of the things, along with helmets, high-vis jackets, some form of identification, and then the same rules as apply to the motorists.
Yes, well, let's come to that, because people will also ask the question, exactly how will this identification work? I mean, I think you and I have discussed this in the past, and we've kind of agreed that it doesn't necessarily have to be on the vehicle, but rather than it should be on the person on the vehicle.
I think the simplest way and the easiest way, because of lack of space logistics, is that every time you are on an e-scooter or on a cycle, you wear a high-vis tabard with a registration number on it that can identify you, so that a member of the public, if you're seen to commit an offence, can see you. And I do appreciate that, some people are going to be tempted to just fake a registration number, but it's in the same way that they do with number plates.
Yeah.
But that needs to happen. And then if someone commits an offence, for example, cycling on the pavement, going through red lights, it's something that cyclists just feel, well, that's their prerogative.
Yeah.
They're entitled to do that. I don't think many cyclists actually realise it's an offence. Then at least that can be recorded, and there should be, on the face of it, a means of tracing the cyclist. And the public can play a part in that. They can play a role in that. But without that, unless the cyclist is stopped or an e-scooter is stopped, then it just isn't going to happen. And also consider, particularly in the warm weather, how many cyclists and e-scooters are driving with unfortunately, drugs in their system and alcohol in their system. It's a huge number that just is not being touched.
Yes.
And
I think some of them might even be delivering drugs as well, Nick.
Well, I don't think, Mike, I'm 100% sure you're right. So, as I said, that there is no law for cyclists. There's no limit for drugs or drink. The limit is whether or not they're unfit. Well, I've never heard of a cyclist being tested for being unfit through drink or drugs. It just simply doesn't happen. We need to introduce a limit, and we need to introduce, as currently exists for e-scooters, and we've heard of a few cases recently, if you're caught driving whilst over the prescribed limit, you're off the road for at least 12 months, there's a heavy fine, etc., etc. It's got some teeth. For cyclists at the moment, it just doesn't really exist. As far as the authorities are concerned, it's not a problem because there's no law to support them.
Right. I've got a good idea here from Philip in Gosport, who's texted into 87222. He says electric scooter and bicycle licences could provide huge income to councils, both through licensing and traffic violations. If you sell it that way, all the Labour councils will support it. It's not a bad idea, that.
Well, there has to be a financial contribution by cyclists for cycle lanes. That, in my view, we all need. I'm not suggesting it's the same as motorists, but yes, there needs to be a licence, there needs to be a proficiency test, and there needs to be that financial contribution. There's no such thing as a free lunch, is there? So we all need to put our hands in our pocket and use that money to make the roads safer and to repair them.
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. Again, the arguments that I get from cyclists are, well, the thing is we already pay lots of tax like everybody else does, and many of us have cars, so we're already paying road tax. That's not the point. As you say, if the government and local government in particular is spending a fortune, and as Sadiq Khan certainly is in London, remaking the road system, then those who are benefiting from that should pay.
Yeah, this is a different system, isn't it? This is a different activity that requires independent financial support. The motorists don't gain from having their lanes removed and given to the cyclists. So, fine, if that's got to happen, and it's got to happen sensibly, it's got to happen with consultation. It's very important, in my view, that the government, there's no knee-jerk reaction from councils as there has been in the past, but there is sensible consultation with representatives of every body, every group, so that the idea is to coexist in harmony. This isn't a war. It's very important that when this petition was launched, that we're trying to be positive so that everybody who uses the road is a winner. This isn't a battle against any particular group. This is a coordinating sensible minds to make the roads better for everybody. And I don't think any particular group should see this as a war against them. It's not anti-anything. It's supporting road safety and trying to make the system work better. At the moment, we don't coexist well, and that needs to change. And we hate change, don't we? Everyone hates change. Cyclists have been used to having the freedom without contribution and without law. When there was a tiny minority, that was understandable. But now it's a serious problem because they're taking the roads away from motorists.
Yeah.
So with that extra room, there comes extra responsibility. and financial contribution and extra law, and then it will work. It will work as well as it can.
Yes.
And
I think
that's
certainly,
always
certainly what we wish to happen is for enough signatures to be put on this petition to ensure that the matter is discussed in the Houses of Parliament. And that's what really should be happening now, because it's at that point, isn't it, Nick, where we need to have a debate about it properly.
Well, if you think about it, Mike, the law is really anachronistic in relation to cyclists. It needs to be brought up to date massively. It isn't out of date for e-scooters, but it's redundant because we don't know who's riding at any one time. And now we're opening up the roads to all these new forms of transport, which are welcome because obviously they have a very beneficial green effect. We need the law in situ so that everyone can do it safely and in a healthy environment.
Yes. So what do people do in order to find this petition to sign it?
Well, for me, if you go onto my Twitter account at Mr. Loophole or my office account, or I'm sure you've got many more followers than me, Mike.
I've got it out there on my Twitter and also on my Facebook page as well.
Yeah. Well, I've got it on my firm's Freeman and Co.'s Facebook, and I've also got it on my Twitter. It's at Mr. Loophole. We need at least 100,000 signatures. I think within the first hour last night there were over 500 on there.
Okay.
So I think from certainly anecdotally from speaking to friends who are sensible, everyone wants to try and get this moving so that there's a sensible debate in government about how we can improve our roads and make them fit for everybody, and not just for a minority or a majority. But that majority is smalling because more and more people want to participate safely in alternative forms of transport. E-scooters is one, cycling is another, but it has to be safe. And if it's not safe, people aren't going to be tempted to join in. If we have safe cycle lanes, there's probably no better way of going to work than on a cycle, as long as you know it's safe and legally compliant.
Yeah, as long as it's not pouring with rain, when of course it's not particularly it's not particularly convenient
we're
at all.
at the start of a beautiful summer, and we're just about to have a slightly delayed but unlock of lockdown. So
let's hope so.
The time is right.
All right, Nick, great to talk to you again. Thank you very much indeed. Nick Freeman, criminal defence lawyer, author and commentator, also known as Mr. Loophole, also co-author with me of this petition. And we need to have this discussed because there's no doubt, and lots of you are getting in touch here. Ross from Shirebrook says, regarding e-scooters and bikes, not long ago the government was banging the drum about serious problem about obesity. So what do? Discourage people from walking and put e-scooters and bikes on the streets. You couldn't make it up. He's talking about electric bikes, of course. And Peter Hitchens is very big on this. He talks about the fact that these e-scooters are a menace, but also they are not in any way healthy because you don't do anything. You just stand on a platform and move. You might as well be in a car. Takes up less room, but it's much, much more dangerous, not only for you, but for pedestrians who can't hear you, for road users who can't see you, and for people who have no clue which way they are going. It's absolutely outrageous.